Hello, hockey fans, and welcome to the fourth and final part of our look at the great career of Frank Mahovlich. If you haven't seen parts 1 through 3 covering his entire 17 seasons in the NHL, the links are in the description and check them out right now. But for those who have been watching, Frank Mahovlich became an icon in Toronto despite its fickle fan base, setting team records, winning numerous accolades, and 4 Stanley Cups. But after 11 seasons, it led to an emotional breakdown after dealing with the tyrant of a coach that is Punch Jim Lock, was also the GM, plus the ungrateful fan base. And then in one of the biggest trades in NHL history, it sent him to Detroit, where for 4 seasons, 2 of them full seasons, he played on a mega-star line with Gordie Howe and Alex Delvecchio. He led the stagnant club to one of its best regular seasons ever, won more accolades, set team records. But then a stupid man named Ned Harkness was about to kill the team. Frank, however, was given a big chance, an offer of a lifeboat off a sinking ship to be traded to Montreal, a team stacked with Hall of Famers. He again made franchise record books, set NHL records, or at least tied them for playoff points, won 2 more Stanley Cup rings as a result, and after 17 seasons, he was the league's 8th all-time leading scorer and 4th all-time leading goal scorer. Some thought Frank was nuts for leaving Montreal, as the team was about to get goaltender Ken Dryden back, and Guy Lafleur was on the verge of a breakout, but of course a lot of this is with the benefit of hindsight. His departure, however, did open the door for a fellow by the name of Steve Shutt to take over as the team's top left-wing forward. But the WHA, the rival hockey league that has been stealing NHL talent with big contracts and producing little results. Okay, I'm not being totally fair. Some markets instantly thrived, some instantly died, sometimes even in the middle of the season. Some had no business being around in the first place. However, you can't help but feel good for someone like Gordie Howe, who had been shafted for years when it came to money, despite only being one of the greatest players of all time, but getting the money he had deserved long ago. However, the WHA deserves credit for many things when it came to the way they changed hockey and their place in hockey history. That major element is the arrival of European imports into North American hockey. But for Frank, there were many elements, including the money, of course. For one, he gets to go back to the town where his pro career began, bringing it full circle, playing for the Toronto Toros, who were originally known as the Ottawa Nationals in the WHA's inaugural season in 72-73. However, they had moved to Toronto in 73-74 and were rebranded as the Toros. And fans were coming to games at Varsity Arena, but now they were moving to Maple Leaf Gardens, a move that drew the ire of Maple Leaf's owner, Harold Ballard. The Toros were coached by a longtime teammate of Frank's from his days with the Leafs, Billy Harris. And this team had talent, no question, including 19-year-old Wayne Dillon, a star of the Toronto Marlies, coming off a great rookie season. The team has also signed Czechoslovakian hockey icon Vaclav Nedomansky for this season. They had young talented winger Tom Simpson, Brantford-born youngster Pat Hickey, former first-round NHL draft pick Tony Featherstone, and solid centerman Gavin Kirk. And to top it off, up front, the hero of the 1972 Summit Series, and the man Frank was traded for back in 1968 when he was sent from Toronto to Detroit, Paul Henderson. He had also defected to the WHA this season. On defense, you had hard-nosed core of Brian Gibbons and Rick Cunningham, Hamilton Moore and Jim Turkowitz leading the way. In net, the man in the scary mask were Tootie the Looney, Gilles Graton, and Jim Shaw and Les Bigley. Ticket sales and box office revenue for the Toros saw huge numbers once Frank was signed to the club. The media hype of him returning to the city of Toronto playing hockey at the Gardens was immense. And considering how well he played in the last 4 seasons in Montreal, and coming off, of course, great seasons in Detroit before that, and again, he's coming off a season where 80 points in 71 games truly shows he is an ageless wonder and still has a lot to offer. And a decision was made, as for the first time in Frank's career, he became captain of his team. He was an alternate captain during his time in Montreal. A well-deserved honor for a man who always led by example. And the Toros were coming off a season where they made it to the 7th game of the semifinals before losing to the Chicago Cougars, so hopes are indeed high. However, before the season would start, the international game came calling once again. Yes, another exhibition Summit Series took place, this time with the WHA Stars, taking on the Soviet national team. The hype behind this series was the fact that Gordie Howe, who was retired in 72, and Bobby Hall, who was bitterly kept off the team due to its, due to his WHA defection, was about to play on the international stage. Frank was one of the few 72 Summit Series alums to play in this tournament, along with former Blackhawks All-Star defenseman Pat Stapleton, who is now playing for the Cougars, and Frank's now teammate on the Toros, 72 hero Paul Henderson, was also part of this team. In Game 1 at Lake Colisée in Quebec, it saw a thrilling affair where the game was tied 3-3, and in the last minute, Frank had a huge one-on-one chance on Soviet megastar goaltender Vladislav Tretiak in net, but couldn't capitalize. The game ended in a tie. The Canadian team won Game 2 at Maple Leaf Gardens 4-1, where Frank got a tremendous ovation. He sat out Canada's terrible Game 3 loss, but then he played his best game in Game 4 with a goal and a helper in a 5-5 draw that saw Canada, however, collapse in a 3-goal lead. Frank played 3 out of the 4 games in the USSR as well, and Canada lost the series as the Soviets went 4-1-3. Definitely did not live up to the 72 series, despite some decent TV numbers. And it started off strong, actually, but then trailed off by the time the 8th game hit in Moscow. Despite some great games, however, this series has actually garnered a bit of a cult following since online and on DVD. But now it was time. The return to Toronto. The Toros opened the season on October 15, 1974 in front of a big crowd at Maple Leaf Gardens, which saw Frank Mahovlich get another hero's welcome. There were no fickle fans here. This town was simply happy to have the Big M back playing for a pro sports team in the 6. They were facing the New England Whalers, led by Wayne Carlton, Tom Webster, Rick Lee, and goaltender Al Smith. And just 1:42 into the game, it happened. Dillon got the puck to Simpson, who set up Mahovlich perfectly near the net for his first WHA goal as the Gardens erupted in cheers. The Toros dominated the game and led 3-0 in the first period with Gratoon playing in net. Oh my goodness, Gratoon, whatever. And then late in the period, Turkowitz cleared the puck out of the zone, allowing Featherstone to set up Frank Mahovlich, his second goal of the game. And then less than a minute into the second period, Featherstone gives it to Nedamaski. They set up the Big M with a hat trick. The Gardens goes crazy as the rafters shake as those cup banners hang and flap, 4 of which Frank helped make happen. The Toros won the game 7-2. Frank received a standing ovation when named first star of the game, of course. The Big M was back at Toronto with the Vegets. The cheers were so loud, Punch Jim Lock heard them all the way in Buffalo. Frank Mahovlich scores his first WHA hat trick and the 15th of his pro career. He had arrived, and back in the WHA, he was here. 2 games later, he had 2 helpers against the Michigan Stags and then a goal and assist in an 11-2 thrashing of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. And the Toros won their first 6 games of the season. Their hot streak, however, came to an end in a 5-2 loss to the Whalers. Frank's first month in the WHA saw him score 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points. Not bad at all. After a humiliating 10-1 loss to Bobby Hall and the Jets and a heartbreaking OT loss to the Cougars, which actually saw Frank play a pair of poor games. Then getting an assist in a loss to Quebec, they roared back with a win over the former Hab teammate Mark Tardif and Michigan with 2 assists. And then the very next game, he had 2 goals and a win over the Fighting Saints. The very next game, after that, scored a goal against the Cougars and a 7-0 wallop. After going pointless in the next few games, on the road an exciting 6-5 win over the Cleveland Crusaders, getting the better of former Bruins star goalie Jerry Cheevers, giving him nightmares from 1971. Frank was named first star of that game. And then on November 24th, a monster 4-point night for Frank. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. First star again, this time in a 9-2 throttling on the Indianapolis Racers. However, the Toros suffered a pair of embarrassing home losses, the latter of which Frank had a goal and a helper. Overall, he had 8 goals, 10 assists for 18 points in November in 16 games. The Toros, despite some bad losses, were looking pretty good. After a win on the road against San Diego to start the month of December, the Toros hosted the defending Avco Cup champion Houston Aeros at home, and that meant the arrival of Gordie Howe. And even at 46 years old, Mr. Hockey was still among the best in the game, and where Gordie goes, crowds come out as well, so turnstiles at Maple Leaf Gardens really came out in excitement for this one on December 3rd, 1974. Indeed, Gordie was Frank's former teammate and linemate, along with the great Alex Delvecchio in Detroit. The 4 seasons Frank spent there, they had achieved great success together, and they also played against each other as rivals for many years. And indeed, 4:26 into the game, Nedamansky and the Big M undress the Arrows defense, and Frank scores. Then near the midway point of the frame, Frank begins, Cunningham continues, and Kirk scores. 2-0 Toros. With just under 2 minutes left in the period, Kirk to Hickey to Frank. That's right, his second goal of the game, his 3rd point. Wow, he is just playing incredibly here. As the Toros led 3-1, but they'd fall apart and lose 5-4. This team is greatly struggling on their home ice, but despite the loss, Frank is named first star of the game and would end up missing 4 games this month, but returned on December 22nd in a home win over the Cougars. And a couple games later, scored an insurance marker goal in another home win over Chicago. In January, Frank was looking solid again, a goal and a helper and a win over Cleveland. On January 12th in Houston, and Frank had 3 apples and a 7-4 win over Gordie and the defending champs. In the very next game, in a loss to the San Diego Mariners, he had 2 assists. He had 7 assists in a 4-game stretch at this time. And then on January 21st, 1975, the WHA All-Star Game took place in Edmonton. Frank, don't forget, played 15 consecutive NHL All-Star Games in the NHL, while he kept his pro streak going with his first WHA midseason classic, being his 16th Pro All-Star Game. Also making their first WHA All-Star games are Paul Henderson, Tom Simpson, and Wayne Dillon, while defenseman Jim Dory has played in every WHA All-Star game at this point with his 3rd straight appearance. The Toros had just acquired him from the Whalers. the East Tower would lose this game 6-4. The Toros returned to action, and in the second game after the break against the Edmonton Oilers, Frank played a beauty. 2 goals and a helper on the road as the team continued to thrive in other towns. Then on January 28, 1975, at home, the Toros faced the Quebec Nordiques, who had just won 10 of their last 11 games. They're having an amazing year led by Serge Bernier and 2 of former Frank's teammates in Montreal, Marc Tardif, who was just acquired from Michigan, and Ray Jean-Houl. And on defense, another former Habs teammate, J.C. Tremblay. In goal, they had King Richard Brodeur. In the first period, they saw some great goaltending early on, but at 13:20 into the game, the Big M is set up perfectly by Martin to score, and indeed, the Toros led 2-0 after 1. After taking a 3-0 lead in the second, just 1:19 later, it's Cunningham to Frank, his second goal of the game, 4-0 Toronto. Toros led 5-1 after 2, but in the third, the unthinkable was happening. Toronto was falling apart, and the Nords were attempting a bit of a comeback. The gap had been cut to 5-4, and they were pressing. But with 1:54 to play, Vaclav to the feather, to the Big M, another hat trick, his second of the year, 60th of his career. Frank was named for star of the game, getting a huge reception from the adoring Toronto fans. What a year he is having for this club. Also, his former teammate Tardif had a hat trick as well. In 13 games in January, Frank had 7 goals, 10 assists for 17 points. Man, these are some amazing numbers. Frank stayed consistent in February, 7 goals, 7 assists for 14 points in 13 games. The Toros suffered some tough losses, however, including an 8-4 bombing at the hands of the Oilers on Valentine's Day. Frank, however, had a goal and 2 helpers for a 3-point night in that one. He followed that with a goal and a helper in a win in Vancouver against the Blazers, and on February 25th had 2 goals in a win over the Mariners 6-4. With 17 games to go, the Toros were looking really good. Frank had a goal and a helper against the Baltimore Blades in a win. The Blades earlier this season were actually known as the Michigan Stags. There you go. Then a couple of games later against the Blades, this time on the road, the Big M didn't care what state or city they were in. He had 2 goals and a helper in a 6-4 win. And, oh, hey, look, more success against the Blades, who were about as sharp as Crayola scissors, and a goal and an assist. Well, anyway, later in the month against Edmonton, he had a goal and a helper in a 5-4 win at home. Then in the very next game, scored his first ever regular season overtime goal of his career in a 5-4 victory over the Nordiques. Of course, the NHL didn't have regular season overtime at this point. Frank did, however, have 2 playoff OT winners, his last dating back to 1960. 2 games later, he had 2 helpers and a win over the Racers. Then the game after that, a goal and an assist and a big win over the Jets. 10 this season, 8 goals, 11 assists, 19 points in 17 games. The Toros finished 43 wins, 33 losses, and 2 ties for 88 points. Second in the Canadian division, just 4 points behind Quebec. 5th overall in the WHA, meaning they'd be one of the 8 overall teams to make the postseason. As once again, for Frank, much like he did so many times in the NHL, it is time for playoff time. And awaiting our hero and the Toros in the opening round, the San Diego Mariners, who finished with a record of 43, 31, and 4 for 90 points, second in the West Division. The Mariners had entered the league in New York as the Raiders. Then the next season became the Golden Blades, and then the same year became the Jersey Knights, and then now they're on the West Coast. Oh boy. And they are led by one of the best players actually in WHA history. Indeed, the league's leading scorer, Andre Lacroix. 41 goals, 106 assists for 147 points, winning the Bill Hunter Trophy as a result for a second time. And became just the second professional hockey player to reach 100 assists, setting the pro record at the time with 106. And was the first team All-Star for the 3rd straight year, every year in the league's existence thus far, and was one of the league's greatest playmakers. They also had a very talented speedy winger, Hamilton, Ontario native Wayne Rivers. Longtime minor league veteran who had finally gotten his big break in the WHA, had thrived, scoring 54 goals, 53 assists, 107 points, 6th in league scoring, 4th in power play goals. Other members of this talented forward core of the Mariners included Dig Sentes, who was among the league's plus-minus leaders and reached 40-plus goals, and another 40-plus goal scorer, Gene Pikash. Left winger Norm Ferguson reached 36, and superb setup man Ray Aduondo had nearly 60 assists. Character players such as Brian Moranz, Mike Lawton, and Kevin Devine round out the forward core. On defense, they were bolstered by first-team All-Star Kevin Morrison, who had 20 goals, 61 assists, and 81 points. In addition to being the top-scoring defenseman, he was a powerhouse, asserting his 200-pound frame when needed. Also on defense was the team's head coach. That's right, 42-year-old Harry Howell, former Norris Trophy winner as the NHL's top defenseman in 1967 and future Hall of Famer, and New York Rangers icon. He was player-coach of this club, as it was a system that WHA had implemented often. And not only was he doing a great job as a coach, he was still solid on the ice as well, with an excellent plus 28. Backstopping them in net was Ernie Wakely, a longtime minor league journeyman who had a pretty good stint with the St. Louis Blues a few years prior, became an all-star for the Winnipeg Jets entering the league, was acquired from the Jets earlier this season, won 20 games, and that's who the Mariners are going with in these playoffs. So, here we go. Game 1 in San Diego, the Mariners bombard Shaw in net, and it goes their way. Frank can't get much going. The Toros dropped the first game 5-3. Game 2, it's a wild shootout with San Diego led 3-0 after one. Then 3:16 into the second period, it's Featherstone to Turkowitz to the big M. The Toros are in this thing. Frank's first WHA playoff goal. But then they trail 6-2 after 2. They trailed 7-3 in the third, made a run for it, but came up short, losing 7-6. Now trailed the series 2-0 heading to Toronto. Game 3, Maple Leaf Gardens. Frank is hustling hard out there. And while he doesn't rack up anything on the score sheet, he's playing with that trademark postseason passion. The Toros win 5-3 thanks to a big game from Lou Nistico. The Toros are in this playoff series at last as we go into Game 4. The Toros are leading 4-3 in the third period, and Dylan gets it to Jacques, who gets to Frank! The Toros led 5-3. We're going to win 6-5. The series is tied at 2. Game 5, we're back out west. And just over 13 minutes into the game, it's Turkowitz, it's Dylan, it's Mahovlich scoring his third goal of the series. The Toros carried that 1-0 lead into intermission. They let a 2-0 lead slip, and it was tied 2-2 after 2. But the Mariners win an exciting 4-3 battle. Now our hero and his boys are up against the wall on the verge of elimination. Game 6, we're back at Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens, and it's San Diego leading 3-0 in the second. And Frank not playing well. The Toros close the gap to 5-4, however, with 3.5 minutes to play. But Lacroix's empty netter with 16 seconds left would seal the deal and end the Toros season. Frank was hustling out there, but couldn't quite ignite the spark we had seen from him in many NHL playoff games in his career that led to those 6 Stanley Cup titles. But be that as it may, he didn't play bad necessarily, just not up to par. The Mariners would go on, however, to get swept by the eventual champions, the Houston Aeros, winning their second straight title. Frank Mahovlich's first year in the WHA saw him score 38 goals, 44 assists for 82 points in 73 games, staying on course of what he was pretty much doing in the NHL. At 37 years old, he still had it. And again, the WHA is indeed a place where seasoned vets could still produce at a high level. Vaclav Nedomatsky was Frank's go-to guy, as together they produced 28 goals one way or another. Neto assisted on more than a quarter of Frank's goals with 10, as 16 different players set the big M for a goal this year. Frank returned the favor, setting up Neto 11 times, more than a quarter of his 41 goals. And then, with them often was winger Tony Featherstone, as he and Frank produced 25 goals together, which included 8 assist collaborations. Frank also worked well with Pat Hickey early in the season, as well as Gavin Kirk many times. Well, no matter where Frank plays, he's still got it, and fitting in well with a solid Toronto Toros hockey team. The WHA seems like a great place for him. In addition to playing in his 16th professional All-Star game, his first at WHA, he became one of the few players to play in both the 72 and 74 Summit Series against the Sylvia national team. And what made this sweeter was, of course, his memorable debut and return playing for a hockey club in Toronto in an arena that he knew like the back of his hand, Maple Leaf Gardens. But it was nothing but cheers directed his way this time. There's no doubt hockey fans in Toronto were glad to have the Big M back in town. I didn't mention that late last season, head coach and former teammate of Frank's, Billy Harris, left the team and Bob Leduc took over. But now this team was going to have a new coach, another fellow by the name Bob, one Frank knew very well and played alongside for the vast majority of his career, Bob Bond. But the Toros would suffer a huge loss as Wayne Dillon was drafted by the New York Rangers in the offseason, 12th overall as a matter of fact in the first round, and decided to report to the club and sign a deal with them. One way the WHA tried to compete with the NHL was signing stars in their 20s still in their teens, as NHL draft rules did not allow young teens to be drafted in the league until 1979. So the team signed Toronto Marlies superstar and North York native Mark Napier to a deal at the age of 18. He was coming off a 66-goal season with 130 points total and winning the Memorial Cup, drawing the further ire of the NHL and their scouts. But there was a big problem at home. Leafs owner and resident bastard Harold Ballard was in control of the Maple Leafs and Maple Leaf Gardens fully by 1975. This won't bode well for the Toronto Toros. Despite that, however, the Toros still look poised to be a threat this season, and our hero as the captain was leading the way. However, he missed the first 4 games of the season due to injury, but did return and had a point in each of the next 3 games to end the month, but the Toros were not off to a good start. Their woes continued as Frank did have a goal and a helper in a tight loss against the Racers. Then in the next game, he did go pointless against the Fighting Saints, who now featured a former Leaf star as well, longtime teammate of Frank's, Dave Keon, who tired of Ballard and left the Leafs and went to the WHA. However, in a wild shootout with the Denver Spurs, our hero had 2 goals and a helper for 3 points in an 11-8 win, which ended the Toros' 5-game losing streak. He scored a goal in a tie with Phoenix, and then the next game had a goal and an assist against the Mariners in a 6-4 win. He kept his point streak going, culminating in a goal and 2 assist performance for 3 points in an 8-7 win at home against the Cincinnati Stingers. And after scoring in an OT loss to the Crusaders, his point streak ended after 7 games, in Game 8 against Bobby and the Jets. But he rebounded the very next game with 2 goals and a 9-5 win on the road over the Stingers, and the Toros defied any choke job you could ever make fun of the Leafs for having. They blew an 8-2 lead! Yes, they managed to relinquish a 6-goal lead and lose 10-9 to Cleveland. Frank had a goal and a helper regardless. The Toros looked bad. Frank, however, did not. He had 11 goals, 8 assists for 19 points in 14 games. In December, Frank was unstoppable. Sadly, we can't say the same for his team. 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points in 14 games, missing 2 due to injury that month. Highlights included 2 goals against the Calgary Cowboys in a tight 4-3 win, named first star of the game. 2 games later, he had a goal and 2 helpers for a big 3.8, but was named second star and was a 5-3 loss to the Fighting Saints. Frank repeated that feat the very next game in a loss to the Winnipeg Jets, a heartbreaker in overtime. He then had a goal and a helper the game after that in a big win over the Nordiques, 6-4. His 8-game point streak would begin in late November, would come to an end, losing to Quebec the very next game. Rebounded a couple games later with a goal and a helper over the Jets, then followed that up with a notch and 2 apples for 3 points against Calgary. Both of those were losses. But then after going pointless in the next 3 games and missing 2 due to injury, he returned with a vengeance in a win over the Oilers with 2 helpers. The Toros as a whole, however, were pretty much a mess. Frank had 4 points in 4 games to start January, including a goal and a helper in a win over the Phoenix Roadrunners. But for the second straight time in his WHA tenure and 17th in his pro career, Frank appears in an All-Star game. This one pitting stars from Canadian teams against American teams. Joining him was goaltender Jim Shaw. Injuries were the only reason for that one, believe me. So he was replacing Jets goaltender Joe Daly. But Vaclav Nedemetsky was joining Frank for his first midseason showdown in a well-deserved selection. And just past the midway point of the second period, Frank was sitting on goal from the pass from Jets defenseman Tommy Bergman to score to make it 2-0 for Canada en route to a 6-1 win. 2 games out of the All-Star break, the Toros were taking on a 3-game losing streak on the road against 2-time defending Africa Cup champions Gordie Howe and sons Mark and Marty and the Houston Aeros on January 20th, 1976. It looked bleak even on paper. The Aeros were looking poised to head towards a three-peat. And indeed, Houston led 3-0, though the Toros got one back and trailed 3-1 after 1. Then 5:38 into the second period, our hero sees a wide-open Turkowitz for a setup. The Toros not only trail by a goal. 46 seconds later, it's fired out to Frank to Gavin Kirk. Suddenly, we're tied 3-3. The Toros took the lead 2 minutes later, but the Aeros would tie it as 4-4 after 2. Then just a minute and a half into the third period, it's the line, giving the Toros fans something to cheer about. Teenage Napier, seasoned Frank, young Kirk, who gets the goal. The Toros led 5-4. Frank gets his 3rd helper of the night. Houston again would tie it, but Nedemetsky gave Toronto 6-5 lead in with 2:52 to go. Gavin, Mark, gets it to Frank Mahovlich. His, oh my goodness, 4th point of the night. The Toros emphatically beat the Houston Aeros 7-5, breaking their losing ways epically. And Frank with another epic night, one of many in his career. He is, of course, named first star of the game, and this type of performance and win, you'd hope they'd boost them further. But no, they'd lose 3 more in a row, now losing 6 of 7. Frank had a point each in those 3 games, and then he'd go pointless in back-to-back ties. And to end them up, they had to face Mark Tardif, Ray Jean-Oul, and the red-hot Nordiques, who were beaten in 7 games. On January 31st, 1976, the Toros entered Lake Galisay, hoping to end their losing ways. Frank was going to do whatever he could. The Nords struck 53 seconds in, but just under a minute later, it's those guys again. Kirk to Napier to Frank. The game is tied 1-1, but the Nords led 3-1 after 1. They'd also take a 4-1 lead, but Henderson would cut it in half. It's 2:33 later. It's N to M as Napier sets up Mahovlich. Oh, he has to reverse the alphabet and then make it 4-3. But the Nords again led by 2 goals, 5-3 after 2, and they took a 6-3 lead in the third period, but then it's fired out to Frank! Another hat-trick for our hero, the 17th, and will be his final of his pro career and 3rd of his WHA career, 1st of this season. The Toros lost 8-4, and Frank's amazing performance will only be good enough to be named 3rd star of the game, as both Réal Cloutier and Ray Jean-Oul had hat-tricks, the latter of whom was the 1st star and had 5 points total. The Toros were now winless in 5 and 8 of their last 9. Despite this, Frank scored 8 goals, 7 assists for 15 points in 12 games this month. And the Toros just kept on losing, despite Frank following up his hat-trick with 3 apples and a loss to the Whalers. Their winless streak hits 17 games. They've only won once in the last 21. Not good at all. After a heartbreaking loss to Houston in OT, where they nearly ended the losing streak, they shocked Bobby and the Jets. A crazy 11-7 win in Winnipeg. Frank had a monster 4 helpers in a win in a leap year showdown. He had away 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points in 12 games despite his team's woes. In the final 20 games of the season, the Toros actually weren't out of a playoff spot yet. And in March, going into April, Frank had 6 goals, 12 assists for 18 points in those 20 games, still staying pretty consistent. He had 2 goals against the Nords in the middle of a 3-game winning streak on March 2nd, but they just couldn't keep up the momentum. Even after a 4-game winning streak in late March, they'd lose 7 in a row to end the season. Those games included 2 apples against the Cowboys and a goal and assist each against the Nordiques. Oh boy, the Toros finished an abysmal 24, 52, and 5 for 53 points. By far the worst season Frank Mahovlich has ever been a part of in his career, maybe only rivaling the 70-71 Red Wings, which he didn't even spend a full season there. They were still in a playoff hunt until that losing streak to end the season. But for the first time since 1969, and only the 4th time in his 19 pro seasons, there will be no playoffs for the Big M. Well, Frank Mahovlich had 34 goals, 55 assists for 89 points in 75 games. Excellent numbers once again. Actually, the 3rd highest point total of his pro career. And much like he did in the past with others, he was helping younger talent progress. Rookie Mark Napier, who won the league's top rookie award that year, he net with Frank for a total of 40 goals, including Mark setting up Frank 16 times, nearly half. And in return, Frank set Mark up 19 times for his 43 goals. Gavin Kirk was on that line with them and had a great year with Frank, and they teamed up to set up 41 goals. And part of that total was 12 assist collaborations. The Toros sadly however, did not have much depth in their later forward lines and encountered many injuries throughout the year. Despite still putting up great numbers, the Toros gave up the most goals at WHA this season, and as a result, Frank was a -16, the worst mark of his career by far. But be that as it may, he was still a warrior, still a machine, still a leader, still played with heart, and no doubt this instills more determination in him to get his team going in the future. But he played in his 2nd WHA All-Star game, and again, that's the 17th All-Star exhibition he'd play in his pro career. Not bad at all. After 19 seasons as a professional hockey player, now 38 years old, he made it known he's not done by a long shot. But there was a problem. The Toros just weren't big enough to stay in Toronto. Attendance had dropped, and while it was staying steady throughout the early part of the season, it declined throughout as the Toros just kept on losing, and Ballard, of course, made it near impossible for them to keep up their costs and end of the lease to stay in the Gardens. Also, it was just impossible to compete with the Leafs at this time to boot. Darryl Sittler had emerged as an icon for the team this past season, and there was just no taking them down. Frank's dream of ending his career in the city of Toronto came to an end, as the Toronto Toros, while still keeping their logo, became the Birmingham Bulls, moving pretty much to the opposite end of the hockey spectrum, the deep southern United States, Birmingham, Alabama. Despite this, Frank was going to see this team through, as he was about to enter a mark that many athletes hope to achieve, his 20th season as a professional hockey player as he entered the 76-77 year. Gilles Leger took over for Bob Bond as coach late last season. Despite not being seen as a hockey market, season ticket sales were actually pretty strong in Birmingham. But the goal is indeed to see if this team can overcome how bad things got last season. Well, the Bulls played their first game in Birmingham in front of 12,000 plus fans, and Frank would notch an assist in a 4-2 win for the Bulls over the Cowboys and the Arrows, and he followed that with 2 assists against the Nordiques, and followed that with a goal and a helper against the Cowboys, and the game after that, 3 apples in a crazy 7-7 tie with the Stingers. More success against the Nords with a goal and 2 apples, 3 points on the 19th. 2 games later, 2 helpers against the Racers, 3 goals, 14 assists, 17 points in 13 games. Wow, in the first 3 games in November, Frank had 6 assists. He was off to a great start. However, on a November 9th loss to the Nordiques, Frank went down with a terrible knee injury that would require surgery. And just like that, his season was over. The Bulls finished 31-46-4 for 66 points and again missed the playoffs, despite great seasons from Napier and Nidomansky. Frank Mahovlich had 3 goals, 20 points, 23 assists, the 17 games he played, and looked like he was heading towards another big season with big numbers. And Napier and Kirk were his go-to guys, the former of which, the sophomore Napier, Frank set him up 8 times, right around half of his assists. And while Kirk and Frank teamed up for 6 assists as well. Kirk was also traded during the season to the Oilers. Frank never had a major injury causing him to miss so much time before, and never had major surgery like this. Of course, many believed his retirement was now imminent, especially after 20 seasons. But Frank wouldn't want to go out this way, especially with the team not doing so well. And he was still producing at a high level before his injury, but again, knee surgery plus his age, many doubt he could ever return to form again. Either way, Frank again once made it clear he'll be back next season. So here we go, the 1977-78 season, season number 21 for Frank Mahovlich as he nears the age of 40. The Bulls have another new coach, Glenn Sonwer. And while Sonwer is best known for his time with the Minnesota North Stars where he had some success, and that'd be after this of course, it seemed he didn't have much faith in Frank producing anymore, feeling he still plays an important leadership role, but this season he'd end up jumbling him all over the place rather than putting him back with Napier permanently, even putting him for a time with enforcer Paul Beaton. The only time Frank's seen productive was when he was with Napier. Let's take a look. This wasn't exactly a stellar year for Frank with very few highlights because Sonner just couldn't seem to find the right spot for him all year. On the other side of the coin, however, I have to point out Frank had slowed down due to his knee issues, but only missed 8 games all season. He started the season well with a pair of 2-assist games against the defending champion Nordiques as well as the Arrows, and in December had a huge night, a goal and 2 assists on December 18th for 3 points when he first started the game for what would be the final time in his career in a game against the Oilers. But he had a mere 14 points in 23 games to start this season, a goal and a helper against the Arrows on January 6th in a win. He had just 4 points in the month of February. 2 of those were assists in a loss against the Arrows. He also had 2 assists against Gordie Howe's new team, the New England Whalers, on March 10th. And then scored his 622nd and final goal as a pro hockey player on April 1st, 1978, in a 5-1 win over the Cincinnati Stingers on Michel Dion, 21 years after his first goal on the Great Glen Hall. Despite the problems, the Bulls' record of 36-41-3 for 75 points was enough for a berth in the postseason, clinching a spot on the final day of the season and a win over the Racers, edging out the Stingers for that final spot. And for one last time for our hero, it's playoff time! Woohoo! And winning the Bulls, the first place overall, Winnipeg Jets, who finished 50-28-2 for 102 points and led by new coach Larry Hillman, and one of the most stacked forward cores the game had ever seen at this point, led by a man Frank knows all too well, his main counterpart for the majority of his career, Bobby Hull, who himself is playing his 21st season, and probably the last great season of his career. He had an insane 46 goals, 71 assists for 117 points at the age of 39, 5th in league scoring, second team All-Star for a second time. His plus 55 was 3rd best in the league, and was still a proven leader. It would be the last great year, indeed, as I said, he would have. And 4th in scoring just ahead of Hulls was Swedish import Anders Hedberg. 63 goals, 59 assists for 122 points. His plus 60 was tied for the league best. He was 4th in power play goals and was a first-team All-Star for the 3rd time. And just ahead of him for 3rd in league scoring was Ulf Nilsson. 37 goals, 89 assists for 126 points. His 89 assists were tied for best in the league. He was 5th in the league with a plus 41, second team All-Star for a second time. With these 3, you'd think they wouldn't need another star forward, but Kent Nilsson, a young Swedish sensation who won the WHA's Rookie of the Year, had 107 points. The Jets became the first pro team since the 1970-71 Bruins to have 4 players reach 100 points, and the first ever to do it with 4 forwards. And in addition, they had productive scorers in Willie Lindstrom, Bobby Gwindon, and Dave Crisco, and further depth with the likes of Peter Sullivan. The Jets' defense was also top-notch, led by the league's top defenseman, winner of the Dennis A. Murphy Trophy as such, Lars-Erik Kjellberg, a star in Sweden for many years, has done wonders in Winnipeg. He can get it done on the score sheet as he had 50 points, and his plus 60 was tied with teammate Hedberg for the league lead. Also joining him, you had Barry Long, providing some hard hitting and leadership, and was a second-team All-Star himself. Running at the blue line, he had seasoned vet Terrible Ted Green, Tough Dave Dunn, and Ken Baird. In net, they had a very reliable tandem, one of who being Joe Daly. He had a 21-11-1 record, and his 3.30 goals against average was actually tied for second best in the league and obtained a shutout. Gary Bromley's stats were very similar. He had 25 wins and also had that 3.30 goals against average, tying his teammate. Either way, here we go. Game 1 the Winnipeg Arena, and Frank was not in action, and it was a disaster. The Jets took it 9-3. Game 2, Frank is back, trailing 2-0 in the first period. Frank goes 2-on-1, coming in with Paul Henderson as he sets him up for the goal. The Bulls trail 2-1, but are down 3-1 after one. With things are bad in the second, down 6-2, however. Westrom gets to Kenny the Rat Linsman. Yes, part of the Bulls, who sets up the Big M for his first goal of the series. 55th playoff goal of his career, 123rd playoff point of his career. They cut the gap in half, but would lose 8-3, heading home down 2-0. Game 3 in Birmingham, Frank plays, and plays pretty decently, but doesn't get much on the score sheet going. 3-2 win for the Bulls, and they're still in this thing. Game 4, the Jets' top guns came up flying high into the danger zone, dominated the Bulls 5-1. It was Frank's 146th career playoff game, and his last. He was hurt and would miss the next game. It didn't matter. Game 5, the Jets took the game 5-2 in the series 4-1. Frank's playoff series turned out to be going out with a whimper, although he did have a goal and a helper in the 3 games he played. Both in, however, in a terrible loss, but actually played quite well for the most part. It was a +2. The Jets would go on to win their second Avco Cup in 3 seasons. Frank scored 14 goals, 24 assists for 38 points in 72 games. Not a great year at all. And since Honor seemed, clueless on how to use him, plus his knee problems, Frank was all over the place. As John Stewart set up a third of Frank's goals, but oh, surprise, surprise, Mark Napier, whenever Frank was put with him, could produce! Setting up 7 goals from Mark, who was actually done with the WHA and did the smart thing reporting to Montreal and signing a contract with them, winning a cup as a result. And 14 different players collaborated with Frank on assists. Peter Marin, Kenny Linsman, and Brent Hughes all tied for 2 each. Frank's 21st and final season as a professional hockey player was one of the most forgettable of his career, and perhaps his worst. It's a miracle the team he was on even made the playoffs, but the club was going nowhere fast. At this point, so was the WHA, who had shrunk in size significantly. The league would cease operation the following season, as their big spending exceeded the cost. But at this point in his career, Frank really didn't have anything to prove. Not much like any pro athlete, sometimes it just comes to an end when you don't want it to. And for Frank, he still wasn't quite ready to give up. More on that in a second. Well, it's a shame that he couldn't get the Toros/Bulls to the next level. That wasn't on him necessarily. He produced where he was supposed to. The team lacked direction and lacked defensive power and had some pretty bad goaltending to boot at times. But be this as it may, 4 seasons in WHA, 3 of them he averaged a point a game. 2 of them he was outstanding and was selected to play in 2 All-Star games. And was welcomed back to Toronto with open arms and helped boost ticket sales even his first season there. And hey, to boot was one of the few players to have played both in the 72 and 74 Summit Series representing Canada. Hey, 89 goals, 143 assists, 232 points, and 237 games during his 4 season tenure at the WHA. Definitely nothing to sneeze at. Frank Mahovlich truly proved again to be an ageless wonder. And despite the downturn of his tenure once the Toros moved from Toronto to Birmingham to become the Bulls and his injuries, his heart for the game always remained. Frank, however, tried for a comeback and actually rejoined brother Pete, who is now with the Detroit Red Wings, a struggling club looking for any edge they can get to make it back to prominence. However, they didn't see Frank as part of that plan, as he went to camp prior to the 1979-80 season, but it was clear his time in the game was over. He decided it was time to call it a day and officially announced his retirement on October 7th, 1979. But to the surprise of literally no one, in 1981, in his first year of eligibility, he was enshrined into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Toronto newspapers and media were singing the praises of a man who should have always been seen as a hero to the club and its fans and its media. Now let's take a look back at some of the goalies in the NHL who Frank victimized the most. In total, his 533 goals were scored on 58 different goaltenders in 17 seasons. And his top 10 targets, 6 of them are Hall of Famers, including the man he scored his very first goal on and the most he would score against on his career. Glenn Hall, 55 goals on Mr. Goalie, spanning over 13 years, mainly during Hall's time with the Blackhawks and some with the Blues. Gump Worsley, despite being a Hall of Famer, was sadly a whipping boy for several top stars throughout his career. The Big M got to him 46 times. Ed Johnson was next in line. Not a Hall of Fame goaltender, but a very good one. Frank getting the better of him 35 times, as even when Ed wasn't part of those bad Bruins teams in the 60s and became part of those powerful Bruins teams in the early 70s, Frank still never let up on him. And then Jacques Plante saw 33 of the Big M shots go past him all the way from 1957 to 73. And the crazy thing about Plante is that Frank scored on him at least once in all 5 teams the icon Hall of Fame goaltender played for. And on top of that, scored a goal on Plant in the WHA, as Plant was playing for the Oilers in 1974-75. Bruce Gamble was next in the firing line, allowing 30 goals, most of which came after Frank had left Toronto and played for Detroit and Montreal. Hall of Famer and former all-time wins and shutout leader Terry Sawchuk actually got the better of Frank often, but our hero still scored 24 on the legend. And then 22 goals were scored on Rangers icon and Hall of Famer Eddie Giacomin. 21 scored on longtime NHL veteran Cesar Maniago. Charlie Hodge may not have been a Hall of Famer, but he was a two-time Vezina Trophy winner, and Frank got to him 15 times, and capping off this list, another Hall of Famer, youngster Bernie Perron, 14 times. Outside of alumni games and the odd old-timers game, Frank Mahovlich never took any permanent full-time jobs in hockey. But even as recently as just before the pandemic, he participated in many ceremonies honoring all three of his former NHL teams. In 1994, he was bestowed the honor of being named a member of the Order of Canada, which is a recognition of outstanding achievements or exemplary contributions in any sector of Canadian society. In 1998, at the age of 60, Frank Mahovlich was named to the Canadian Senate by then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and held the spot until his mandatory retirement on his 75th birthday on January 10, 2013. On October 15, 2016, Frank Mahovlich was part of a huge ceremony where more than 15 Toronto Maple Leaf legends were honored in having their jersey number retired, along with Hall of Famer Darryl Sittler, had the number 27 retired in his honor. Fans in Toronto have learned to appreciate Frank more in retrospect than they did during his time there. Either way, it showed despite all the hardships, his legacy was still etched in stone. And then, just a mere few months later in 2017, NHL's 100th anniversary, Frank Mahovlich was named as one of the 100 greatest players in the league's history. As of April 2024, Frank Mahovlich is 86 years old, living in Toronto with his wife of over 60 years, Marie. Well, it's all been said at this point in this four-part series, but you look at this picture right here, it does say 1,000, maybe even thousands upon thousands of words about Frank Mahovlich. While it tells a lot of the story, again, it doesn't tell the whole story. And it has truly been a pleasure covering this great career that he fought to achieve. He may not have gotten the respect and adulation he deserved at times, but his legacy has become appreciated more and more as time has gone on, and it's good that he's been able to see that all unfold. But in 21 professional seasons, 622 goals, 713 assists, 1,335 points, and over 1,400 games played. Man, what a one-of-a-kind talent. And at last, that wraps up our four-part series on the Big M, Frank Mahovlich. What other players would you like to see us cover extensively? Leave a suggestion in the comments. Like and share the video, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya!